This is The Extra Point, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast, sponsored by your Phoenix Suns.
Well, Cardinal camp is just around the corner. We'll be over there on Wednesday to kick things off. And if you haven't heard, Arizona's Family is now your Cardinals official station for this season. There is a lot to discuss, so let's discuss it with one of our favorite people to discuss Cardinal football with. We'll bring in Darren Urban from azcardinals.com. Usually like Saturday Night Live, they have like a jacket, if it's like your 6th or 7th appearance. I'm working on the jacket, but I do appreciate the time. And how was your summer before we get into all things Cardinal football?
It was relatively short. It's funny. I saw a graphic somebody put out on Twitter about basically the months that each league takes up during their season. And obviously there's a giant gap for the NFL once February is over until essentially August. And it just gave me, I tweeted out, it gave me PTSD over all the people that always used to ask me, okay, when the season's not going on, what do you do? Because, Mark, that there's just so many things that are going on around this team and around the league for most of the offseason. So I did get a chunk of time off, but it all comes really quickly, late in June and the early part of July. And that's always when I take my vacation because there's always something else going on. But we're back. Everything's about to start. Congratulations on your crew's new thing with the Cardinals and being the official station. I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more of you, but it's a good time to be around the Cardinals and what they could be. Obviously, they only won 4 games last year, but things are so much different. It does not have the feel and the vibe of a 4-win team.
No, for sure. And I mean, you might be running when you see me walking down the hallway being like, hey, Darren, do you have like 20 minutes? But as far as just that vibe around the team, it does seem like the page has completely been turned from 2 years ago, from even last year with the momentum, the wins in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia lady screaming at the Eagles because she couldn't figure out how they lost to the Cardinals, the win in Pittsburgh. And I mean, I think Matt Prater might never tell us, but I will never believe that he did not miss that field goal, maybe intentionally, to help the Cardinals get Marvin Harrison Jr. Maybe we'll never know, but how would you describe just the momentum going into training camp?
Well, let me put it this way. I struggle with the term momentum. I will say that. I'm not a believer in momentum carrying over from one season to the next because there's so much change and there's so much time between those years. But I do believe that the culture can be built upon in those moments. And I do think that that's a lot what happened late last year. I mean, they were competitive for most of the season, even before Kyler Murray came back. And then when he did come back, we just saw so many of the things clicking into place over, what this could look like, what this team could be. And that's with the roster that, quite frankly, wasn't even really Monty Ossenfort's all the way yet. They still had a lot of things they wanted to change, upgrades they wanted to make. And while I don't think they're all the way there at this point, they're much further down the road than they were at this time last year. So I'd say when you talk about, again, momentum, I'm going to hesitate on, but they built something that is sustainable, feels sustainable, and that everybody kind of understands it's sustainable. And when you start getting the players that the coaching staff really wants to have around, that's the kind of people they want to build around, I mean, that goes a long way. And then, of course, having QB1 healthy through an off season, that also makes a big difference. Now, they got to do it on the field. And I got a chance to talk to both Monty and JG in some, I don't want to call them off the record moments because I'm about to talk about them, but like moments that weren't interviews. I was just talking with them. And it's actually been multiple times with Gannon. And I kind of talk about this whole thing. And every time, both of them, one of the first things they say is, yeah, well, we got to win games. And they leave it there because they know that whatever we want to talk about and whatever good things are happening, it's got to translate into wins. And I love that attitude. It'd be real easy for them to accept the congratulations of rebuilding the culture and rebuilding the roster alone right now, but they know it's got to translate into victories, and the rest of it The rest of it won't matter if you can't do that. Now, I think that's going to happen as we go, but they know it's got to happen first.
I think those 2 wins on the road in Pennsylvania last year showed that this coaching staff knows how to win football games. Am I making a bigger deal of it than it was going on the road and winning those 2 games?
No, yes and no. I mean, I don't. You weren't. I'm gonna try and play both sides a little bit, and I'm going a little bit negative first. You weren't playing Kansas City in Kansas City at that point. You weren't playing San Francisco in San Francisco. You were playing an Eagles team that clearly was struggling at the moment, and we saw that play out right before that game and definitely after. And the Steelers were kind of trying to find themselves because they didn't have a quarterback. And as great as Mike Tomlin is as a coach, and I do believe he's a great coach, you can't overcome having mediocre quarterback play. That said, I do think those games meant a lot. This is a franchise that historically hasn't always been great when you're traveling that far east to play games. The Pittsburgh game, they managed to win despite, I think there was like an hour delay because of the weather at one point. You know, Philadelphia, that's a tough crowd to play in front of. And the Eagles had a big lead in that game. So I do think there was a lot to be made about those. But I also think, again, with the momentum, like, I don't mind talking about those now, but those have to be out the window pretty fast. I mean, we have a different team now that we're looking at on the field. We have a lot of different things to analyze, and the opponents are going to be in a different place, just like this team is. So I think it marked something important last year, but I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with this year. I mean, if you slide a little bit, then everybody's going to be like, oh, okay. So, yeah, I think some of it, it's good to acknowledge. I think it was important at the time, but it has little carryover overall, I think.
Kyler says bet the over. He put that out on his social media. I think Vegas had the Cardinals at 6.5. Is that a product of like gym endorphins and Kyler looking yoked after coming off the knee injury 2 years ago? He's been in the weight room, and I mean, he looks great, and you know the arm talent's there, and he's got a rookie wide receiver who could set the league on fire. Or could the Cardinals, I mean, what has to go their way so we get to Christmas time and could be talking about potentially knocking at the door of a playoff?
I would, first of all, I want to address the bet the over thing. I mean, first of all, the way gambling is going in these days, and with the way the leagues have embraced all that, you kind of get it. And I don't, Kyler's not dumb. He kind of sees that stuff. I do think there was a little bit of it that felt a little bit more, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of an Urban Dictionary way to use the term, where you might be taking something out of context in a bigger picture. The win total might be what it is, but I just think that's an overall vibe, as it were, over like, hey, you better bet the over with me. You better understand that I'm coming to do this. I don't think necessarily it was because he was feeling good in the gym, although obviously he is. I don't think that really ever went away for Kyler Murray. I think he's always carried that confidence. You want to be careful about how much you put it out there when things aren't going great. But I think that speaks to not only where he sees himself, but also with the team, and also where the coaching staff, and again, the culture. You don't put that kind of stuff out with social media unless you're feeling pretty good about where things stand. And I don't think there's any question, and I haven't had any big, long, deep conversations with him about it, but I've been around him his entire career in the NFL. I don't think there's any question that his positivity over what's going on in the building, over what the general manager is doing and what the coach is doing, has been any greater than it is right this moment.
And I think we've seen growth from Kyler. It's hard to tell because we're not at an age where I feel like you get a lot of context about things, but I do feel like the leadership has grown, and I think a lot of that is the Gannon coaching staff taking over, and he really he just likes his coaches, respects his coaches, and is all in on what they're doing, and has a lot of confidence in that. Is there another step here from Kyler? What does it look like for him? 3 years, 5 years going forward here, as we talk about becoming the guy who could have this team potentially in the playoffs on a yearly basis?
Well, I think there's always growth that can be there. I mean, even Tom Brady and Peyton Manning were growing at the end because as if you play long enough, your physical skills decline, but as your mental skills continue to get better, you can maybe improve as a quarterback. I think there's still a lot of that out there for Kyler. I mean, he's still relatively new in this offense. He hasn't even been at a calendar year physically. And I think that will only continue to get better. But I do think he's growing on a mental level, both as a player and as a leader. All those things, continue to improve. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald was a whole different person when he got in the league the first 3, 4, 5 years than he was in years 7, 8, 9. So I think that's for most players, and I think that's with Kyler. So, what that means this particular year, I'm not sure. Like, if this offense runs how we saw it in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and down the stretch, I don't know if you're going to see a guy with 4,000 yards passing necessarily or 30 touchdown passes. It could happen that way, but I think they could be very successful, and he doesn't reach those numbers because of how they run and how they do different things. So I think ultimately for me, what Kyler does, a lot of it's going to be about the eye test. What does it look like as he's doing it rather than straight statistics?
Is James Conner the key to this team?
He is a key. I mean, Kyler Murray is the key to the offense and the key overall to the team because he's the quarterback. And every team is going to be that. If your quarterback's not playing at a high level, you're going to have a very hard time. You might make the playoffs, but how far are you really going to go? So Kyler Murray is still going to be that guy. But is James Conner super important? Yes, I absolutely believe that. Now, will they manage his playing time a little bit now that you have Trey Benson and you have a full running back room and you want to make sure he's on the field, if at all possible, for 17 games plus rather than missing a game or two? Yeah, I think there's part of that. Now, make no mistake, James Conner injury last year came because a Bengals helmet hit him in just the right place at the wrong time. And you're not going to be able to protect that. That's a one-off, and that doesn't matter if James Conner is getting 20 carries or 14. But I do think he brings an intangible to the team that makes it very important for him to be on the field and in the locker room and active. And so if he gets hurt or whatever. So, yeah, I do think he's incredibly important. I think in a lot of ways, I think of the emotional way that Fitz kind of fired up this team, especially later in his career. He'd make a big play, and you'd see it on his face and in his body language. I think James Conner is that guy for the offense right now. And there's something, for lack of a better term, James Conner is cool. Like, he's a cool dude. Now, I'm sure all these guys feel like they're pretty cool, but, like, James Conner is the kind of guy, the way he carries himself, the way he plays. You want to be with that guy. You want that guy to want you in his circle, to want you to play hard, and you want to impress him. That's the vibe that I get from James Conner. So, yeah, I think in those ways, James Conner is a very crucial part of everything they're doing.
And if you add a Marvin Harrison breakout rookie year to that mix, it seems like the Cardinals could have something. As far as just Harrison as a rookie, how big of a learning curve do you think will be there for him coming out of playing in big-time games at Ohio State?
Well, if you listen to him, not much, and we will see what happens. I think he understands because of his lineage and who his dad is. I think he understands a lot more than many rookies might. I think he's an incredibly hard worker, and I think he's going to do everything in his power to be ready right away. And we've seen receivers in this league be ready from jump. I don't think it's fair to necessarily assume he's going to go out and get 1,400 yards because of the way this offense is kind of built and some of the other receivers they have. But he could get you 900 yards and still be an incredibly big factor, depending on what all happens with everybody. I do think he's going to make a big impact right away, and we'll find out. I mean, if he's that good, defenses are going to pay attention to him really closely right away. And then if Trey McBride's getting a lot of one-on-one or Michael Wilson, you might not see as many targets for Harrison, and he's still making a big impact. So I'll be curious to see where it goes. I mentioned talking to somebody earlier today that I think Marvin Harrison, that's the first thing I really want to see in training camp, quite frankly, is how they're using him and how he looks. And if I had to pick the three biggest storylines going into the season and going into training camp, he's definitely one of them.
What is the biggest area of concern for you about this team going into training camp?
I think generally, I think if you're getting specific, it's just what the cornerback situation looks like, and bigger picture, the pass defense. They did improve massively, in my opinion, the defensive line. Not as much about the edge rushers. They stuck with who they have at edge rusher. I want to see what kind of pass rush they can produce, not just sacks, but the actual pressures and what that means up front and what that means with a cornerback group that's still pretty much untested. I've seen a lot about this team playing a lot of high-scoring games given what they could be offensively and where they are defensively. I think defensively it's going to be real easy for defensive players and defensive coaches to go in their individual meeting rooms when no one's listening and saying they do not respect us worth a crap, whether it's national media or local media or other teams. And everybody says that, but I think they're going to have a legit reason to say it. And I think it's going to create definitely this vibe of let's go show them. Now, they've got to still do that. And I do think Nick Rallis did some things with his defense last year with personnel that you wouldn't necessarily think he'd be able to get stuff done. And I know they had their moments of weakness, and I get all that. But I do think it's headed in the right direction. They need some playmakers on that side of the ball still, but I think they're in a better place. But I would say that's what you got to be looking at.
We had Darius Robinson stop by the studio along with Tip Ryman and Trey Benson, and just three really, you could kind of see the DNA of what Monty and Gannon are looking for in guys, just really engaging guys. And it's easy to sit there and say, man, this guy's going to make a major impact. We've seen more than one Cardinal rookie come in here that you think is going to set the world on fire, and it's a jump up. It's definitely like we talked about, a learning curve with Marvin Harrison. So, right. How much it does seem like this team is relying on a lot of young guys, and maybe this year there'll be some bumps in the road once again to just get everybody. Get it organized, get everybody's you get that learning curve down, and 2, 3, 4 years from now, that's when you could really be something. But how much do you think you can depend on rookies in the NFL, their first season? And feel free to quote Bruce Arians here.
Well, I will say this. I think we've seen a dramatic shift. Most coaches over the years, whether it was Bruce, whether it was Ken Wisenhunt, they weren't big fans of rookies much before Thanksgiving, if at all. And this coaching staff wants to play rookies. I think they know they need to play rookies. And they've basically built the roster so they have to play rookies. I think they're going to get a lot of playing time. There absolutely will be bumps in the road. That's a given. And is this team ready to make a run at the division title this year or win 10 games? I don't know about that. I think a lot can happen, and I'm not ruling anything out. But I do think there are steps involved here as you go. And I think they can have a very, very good season with the rookies and everybody and still fall short of the postseason. And it would depend on how it happens, and that's always. When you talk about the rookies in general, though, I mean, when you're drafting that high in every round and you have this many picks in the first 3 rounds, yeah, they better be playing and they better be doing something. And I think in some ways, that around here, the rookie thing has been downplayed, not only because coaches were wary of playing them. But unfortunately, as the years went on, we got the realization that a lot of them weren't very good. They certainly weren't good enough to play a lot or make a second contract. So, I mean, the guys that were good enough, Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, Darrell Washington, they did play early. So when rookies weren't playing a lot, maybe it just had to do with the fact they just weren't good enough. And that's what we will see in training camp. But I do think a lot of them showed last year that they were worthy of being out there. And I think you're going to see a lot of them this year. And it's going to be fascinating. Cornerback especially, where you have so many guys that you picked up last year, and then you made another couple top 3-round picks this year. Who's going to be out there? How much they're going to be playing? I think it's going to be fascinating because, like you said, they're going to be playing.
Yeah, I can already see the graphic on opening weekend on CBS comparing Marvin Harrison Jr. to Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So that's going to be fascinating. Maybe you could say the quarterbacks were a little further down the road, but I guess that Burrow and Chase came in together. So maybe that's the.
Well, and the other thing, Mark, is like, if you want to go back, who's the guy that people want to compare Marvin to? And it's Fitz, rightly or wrongly. Fitz had 780 yards as a rookie. Now, that wasn't bad, and he did have Anquan Bolden on the field at that time, but somebody made the point, about Anquan. Anquan had a great rookie year, 1,377 yards, but Anquan struggled his second year in part because he missed the first 6 games because of a knee injury. So it wasn't like Anquan was getting all the yards that year. They just weren't a great team, and, Fitz was still learning the game and didn't do a whole lot. He was the Todd Haley one-trick pony of running down the field and leaping and catching it. There wasn't a lot of yards after the catch. Now, I think, and Larry told me this much earlier this offseason, Marvin is so much more polished of a player than Larry was when he came in. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is way ahead of the game there. And I think he's a lot closer of a Jamar Chase coming in than maybe a Larry Fitzgerald, all due respect to Fitz. But again, there's a lot of stuff that plays into it on what the numbers look like, and it won't necessarily be because Marvin is or isn't ready.
Who would be a breakout guy to watch over the next couple weeks here at training camp? And I guess maybe couple that with who are you most looking forward to interviewing?
Who am I most looking forward to interviewing? We got a lot of good guys to interview. I will say one of the things I love about this rookie class is there's lots of good guys to interview. And even so, some of the free agents, I like talking to Mac Wilson. I like talking to Sean Murphy-Bunting, and the 2 defensive tackles. Justin Jones, I think, is an intriguing interview. So there's many guys there. I think for me it helps because I'm around so much that they some of them might not know my name, but at least they see my face and there's a comfort level that helps a little bit. But in terms of breakout players this year and the guys you want to see, I think one name that keeps coming up for obvious reasons is B.J. Ojulari, the pass rusher who had a pretty good pass rush rate and getting pressures last year. Didn't have a lot of sacks, only had 4 sacks, but got in there when he got the chance. He didn't have an offseason. Everybody wants to talk about Kyler. He really didn't have much of an offseason because he was coming off injuries too. So he's finally in a good place, and he kind of knows this is his deal, and he's a second-round pick. And again, when you're picking guys in the first, second, third round, okay, but the first and second round, those guys better be productive, and they need him to be productive. So he's a guy that I'm really hoping kind of jumps out a little bit. Garrett Williams is another guy in his second year who I think he had a solid first season, but again, didn't have an offseason, coming off an ACL tear, wasn't ready at the beginning of the year. What do these guys look like? If we're talking about a guy, kind of further out, not just a second-year player, and you're talking about breakout, it's tough because they've got so many young guys that they just brought in. Like Michael Wilson, I think, could be that guy. I'm curious to see what Evan Brown does at left guard if he's that guy. He's a free agent who's kind of bounced around a couple places, but I really like how everybody's talked about him. I don't think he's going to be any All-Pro or anything, but it really sounds like he fits what they're trying to do and who he's got with. And like this time last year, Yelda Froholt had never played any center or hardly played any center in his life. And he ended up being the starter in the offseason. We kept waiting for them to sign a veteran to put in front of Froholt. And nope, they stuck with him the whole way. And I thought he played pretty well. And he's there again this year. So I think ultimately that's a guy to watch.
Where can we find your coverage, and what does the first couple days of camp look like for you?
First couple of days of camp is getting settling in just like everybody else. There's not going to be a whole lot until the full pads come on. It's going to be pretty low key for the players. But you can find all my stuff on azcardinals.com and at Cards Chatter on Twitter. And here we go.
Here we go. All right. If I'm coming down the hallway, just walk slowly away. You don't have to run.
Anything for you.
All right. Thanks so much. Good seeing you, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
This is The Extra Point, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast, sponsored by your Phoenix Suns.